Ken Jacobson, and I'm the outings chair for the Southeast Michigan group. I'm also co-chair for the State of Michigan Outings Committee. And outings is something we're just getting restarted. Actually, during the pandemic, Sierra Club had shut down their outings program, and we're just getting it restarted now. If you go to our website, like I'm sharing on the screen here, and you go to the outings tab, you'll see that it lists on our website when we have different outings that are coming up. So the next two are on March 22nd, which is at Indian Springs. This is the first Saturday of spring. We'll be hiking out there. And then on the 30th, we're going to be at Wolcott Mill Metro Park. The hike at Wolcott Mill is going to be, usually we'll hike around 4 or 5 miles. Wolcott Mill, we're probably going to do about 2 miles, and we're actually encouraging people maybe that don't get out hiking a lot to come out, and families with kids and stuff. We're going to try and do a little more leisurely pace and try and engage some people maybe that wouldn't come on our normal outings. And we're really hoping to get some family and children, you know, out onto the trails with us. So that's what we're going to try and do. If you're wondering what's going on at Sierra Club, you can go out on our website. You can see the outings. We have the monthly programs. We also have a political and conservation committees, and we also have a climate team that works on climate issues here in the Detroit area. So we'd encourage you to go out and check those out and get involved. So I'm going to turn it over now to Kendal, and if you could quickly just introduce yourself.
Okay, well, hi everyone. Thanks for spending your evening with me and hearing this presentation, and thank you to the Sierra Club for inviting me to present. My name is Kendal Kuneman. I'm the Executive Director of the Detroit 2030 District, and I just started in this role July of last year. We actually have our former Executive Director on the call as well, Connie Lilly. She's joining us. And just a little bit about myself. Hi, Jeff. Hi. Some new people coming into the room. Just a little bit about myself. So I have been with the Detroit 2030 District for a number of years. Prior to that, I did work for the city of Detroit and was part of a team that helped launch the first Office of Sustainability at the city. Also worked on a number of municipal energy efficiency projects while I was there. I also have I've also worked for several other environmental nonprofits. Some of you may or may not be familiar with Energy Works Michigan and the Michigan Renewable Schools Program from a number of years ago, going back 2009, 2010. But I've worked in the building energy efficiency space for the bulk of my career. I don't often say this, but I am a trained architect, so I do have a background in architecture and design build, but most of my career has been focused with buildings and energy efficiency and renewable energy, but primarily with energy waste reduction. So would you like me to get started?
Yeah, go ahead. Go right into the presentation.
So today I am going to share a little bit about what the Detroit 2030 District is. I'm also going to talk about the City of Detroit's recently adopted energy and water benchmarking ordinance and a little bit about what that means, what it is, and then just some of the specifics around that. So feel free to put plenty of questions in the chat. I'm going to try to get through these slides for us and allow us to have plenty of time for Q&A. My slides are a little bit delayed, but so first of all, I just want to give a little bit of history about Architecture 2030 and the 2030 districts for those who aren't familiar. So Architecture 2030 has a mission to rapidly transform the built environment from being the major contributor of greenhouse gas emissions to being a central solution to the climate crisis. So going back 2005, there was an architect named Ed Masria who created the 2030 Architecture Challenge, and he challenged architects to design and renovate buildings to reduce emissions by reducing energy, water consumption, and transportation emissions. So Architecture 2030 was formed, and the program was introduced as a citywide program. which is what led to the Seattle 2030 district being launched in 2010 as the first 2030 district in the country, with the support of the Department of Energy to make it replicable. So the 2030 districts network is a network of districts across the country.
What's up, buddy?
Which is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that was created to respond to the connection between climate change and the global building sector. So right here, you can see the other districts across the US that exist. Also wanted to mention that in 2022, we had the opportunity, this was after COVID, we had the opportunity to host the 2030 districts network here in Detroit. So all of the districts came to Detroit, and during that week spent in Detroit, a new goal was adopted by the district, which was acceleration to zero beyond 2030, to provide critical leadership and resources to reduce emissions in the entire building environment by 50 to 65% by 2030 and reach zero emissions by 2040. Detroit is now the third largest district in North America. We have over 68 million square feet of building space enrolled in our program and over 500 buildings. So just very briefly, who we are a private-public partnership. So we do have 3 membership types. So if you own or manage a building in Detroit, you can join our program for free. We also have businesses that support us financially. Those are our professional stakeholders. And we also have community stakeholders. So those are other nonprofits, local government that we partner with, look for ways to collaborate.
Who's, cause you mentioned how big the Detroit area is, so who sets those bounds? Like, how's that determined?
So when the districts originally formed, they all formed around the central part of downtown initially. So the boundaries were set to like around just the downtown areas. But we have since expanded to just being citywide. So anywhere in the city of Detroit, if that helps.
Yeah, but then an example, like there was Ann Arbor and Portland up there, and those would be, you said those are smaller ones?
So they're smaller in terms of the number of buildings that have enrolled in their program.
Okay.
But I believe all of the districts have expanded citywide, but that might not be entirely accurate. It may still be that some of the districts have a specific boundary within their city. But I believe that all of them have expanded to being a citywide effort, if that helps.
Yeah.
Answer that question. But we are really excited that we have 4 districts in Michigan now. So we do have, starting with Grand Rapids, then Detroit, then Ann Arbor, which recently expanded to the county-wide level, which we're really excited about. And then Lansing is an emerging district right now. So just brief history about us. So there was a lot of volunteer effort to get this district started, beginning as far back as 2013, when there was an initial meeting held, and a presentation to Detroit City Planning Commission, followed by an exploratory committee, and then the district becoming an emerging district. And then finally launching in June of 2017 is when Detroit 2030 district launched as the 16th district in the country. And then we achieved our 501(c)(3) status. These are some of our board members. There might be some familiar faces, names on here, but very happy to have all of these folks on our board. And so one thing I wanted to bring up also is just this, the American Lung Association and this Healthy Air campaign that I came across recently, just because I've worked in energy efficiency for most of my career. It's something that's, I think, is harder for people to really grasp because you can't see it. And And similar to air quality, but I think right now there's a lot of focus on the air that we breathe and so associating the work that we do with the fact that when we power our homes and our businesses, that it does take energy to power them. And if the buildings are less efficient, then we're using more and we are contributing more to our outdoor air pollution. So just making the connection here that emissions from buildings do affect the air that we breathe. I also wanted to talk about implementing state, local, and regional plans. So I'm sure most of you are familiar with some of our climate plans that we have in place, but if you're not, the state of Michigan does have the My Healthy Climate Plan. SEMCOG is working on a regional climate plan, and then I'm talking specifically about Detroit tonight, so about our the Detroit climate strategy as well. So many municipalities have adopted ambitious climate goals, and many more are going to do so. City of Detroit has both a sustainability action agenda and climate strategy. And then what we're going to talk about tonight is the benchmarking ordinance. So that Detroit has joined other leading US cities in adopting an energy and water benchmarking ordinance. So the 2030 districts where we come in is that we engage local owners and service providers who can help municipalities meet their goals. So we are the boots on the ground doing the work of addressing climate change adaptation in the built environment. And the work that we're doing is helping to implement these state, local, and regional plans. So I just want to share a little bit more about us, and then I'll get into the bulk of the benchmarking piece. So we do, with those 500 plus buildings that we have in our program, we often do pilot programs. So we do have an EV charger pilot program that we're in the process of wrapping up, actually. So we install level 2 EV chargers at 10 building member locations across the city. And more than half of those were at houses of worship. They are required to be made publicly available. And the project did use Michigan manufacturers. So you can see some of our partners over here. The pilot was funded by the MEDC. And then some of our partners were Powering Michigan, DTE, Next Energy, and Michigan Clean Cities. So we were really excited to be able to offer that pilot to get more EV chargers, not just downtown, but actually throughout the city. I also wanted to talk about something else that we offer building members, or well, I should say we're going to begin offering, is a building scorecard. So this year we're going to be providing individual building scorecard reports to our building members, which is just a simple 1-page high-level summary of how the building is performing compared to where it was the previous year. But also sharing like what's the cost per square foot. And so I think this is going to be a really helpful tool and a way for us to connect with the buildings on an annual basis to kind of go over where you're at, what's changed, and where to improve. As a district, we aggregate energy usage data for all of our building members, which we use for our district-wide reporting to show our district's progress toward meeting carbon emission reduction goals. And then we also have a partnership with the city, a new partnership. So the city of Detroit is working to reduce carbon emissions from Detroit buildings, and the benchmarking ordinance is going to require commercial, industrial, and multifamily buildings that are over 25,000 square feet to comply with the city's ordinance this June 1st. So through a grant from the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Energy, EAGLE, we partnered with the city of Detroit over the next 2 years. And that means we're going to be offering free one-on-one technical assistance to help reduce technical barriers and accelerate the compliance of the ordinance. So this support is going to be directed to the buildings that the city may have the hardest time complying with the ordinance, and those are the nonprofits, affordable multifamily buildings, houses of worship, and childcare and education centers. We also host something each year called the Detroit Energy Challenge and the Energy Challenge Awards Breakfast, and this is in partnership with the City of Detroit And it's an extension and in partnership with the Michigan Battle of the Buildings. If you're not familiar with this, this is like a friendly competition to award the biggest losers. And so it awards the statewide biggest losers, who are the buildings that are reducing the most energy consumption from the prior year. And in Detroit, we celebrate the Detroit buildings specifically. So buildings in Detroit have the opportunity to be awarded at the statewide level and at the local level. So we did just confirm that we're going to be holding this at the Net Zero Energy Center in Detroit in Corktown again this year, June 12th. This will be our 4th annual time. And the Michigan Energy Summit is going to be May 8th in Grand Rapids to award the statewide. Some of you may or may not have heard, because it's very brand new, that the Royal Oak is starting their own energy challenge as well. Cool. Again, with the support of the Michigan Battle of the Buildings, so that you might start to see that. It's very, very new. I think, yeah, so there's no cost to enter the competition. And if you enroll in the statewide competition and your buildings in Detroit, you're automatically enrolled, and vice versa. And once you're enrolled, you never have to enroll again. You just have to make sure your energy data is updated by the deadline the next year, which our deadline just passed yesterday. So I think
it's a great name, Battle of the Buildings.
Yes, and I think this is their 11th year that they've been doing it.
It's a cool program.
It is a very cool program, and they do a really good job. So ways to get involved. You can become a member. Like I mentioned, there's those 3 member types. One is a building member, so you can enroll a building in our program. If you're a business and you're interested in supporting us, we have various levels of sponsorship, and also event sponsorships. If you're a nonprofit or local government, you can join us as a community stakeholder. We have committees and volunteers. So those are just some ways to get involved. But tonight I'm going to be talking about how in November of 2023, the Detroit City Council unanimously voted to adopt an energy and water benchmarking ordinance. And this was a key action in the city's, it was very recently released, Detroit Climate Strategy. This ordinance, the effort to get this ordinance adopted was led by the Detroit Green Task Force Energy Waste Reduction Committee, which I'll talk a little bit about if you're not familiar with the Green Task Force. So I am a member of the Green Task Force, and the Green Task Force exists to advise City Council on environmental principles and practices to better serve the city of Detroit. It's made up of environmental advocacy groups, nonprofit organizations, environmental businesses, government employees, and residents. And it's currently being convened by Councilman Scott Benson of District 3. There are 7 different committees, and I co-chair the Energy Waste Reduction Committee, which we formed in March of 2019. We noticed that there was not a committee focused on energy efficiency or energy waste reduction. So we approached Councilman Benson and we started the committee. As a committee, we identified what our priorities should be, where we should focus. When the COVID shutdown happened, we met virtually and we had identified the benchmarking ordinance as being a priority and asked ourselves, is this really something we should be focusing on now with COVID? And just determined that we did want to start that process. So we started working on what it would take to get a benchmarking ordinance adopted in Detroit. I'm not going to go through all of this, but what we are really hoping to achieve with the benchmarking ordinance is that we increase energy efficiency in buildings, and we overall, by doing that, we're improving the experience of the occupants of those buildings, the safety, health, and comfort, increasing resiliency of our community, reducing operating costs, increasing the number of buildings that are benchmarked. The list goes on, and decreasing greenhouse gas emissions through energy efficiency and renewable energy. So I mentioned maybe I didn't mention this actually, the city of Ann Arbor was the first city to adopt an ordinance, a benchmarking ordinance in Michigan, 2 years prior to Detroit. And Detroit was the second city. But this map shows other cities across the US that have adopted not only benchmarking ordinances, but other building performance policies. Not only cities, also statewide policies as well. So we are not the first. It's a very, I think there's over 50 benchmarking policies across the US. So what is a commercial benchmarking policy? So it does require building owners to submit their energy and water consumption data annually to the local government. So benchmarking is tracking the building's energy and water usage. The EPA has a free tool called Energy Star Portfolio Manager. It's an online tool that can be used to measure and track this data as well as greenhouse gas emissions. And this is usually what local governments use as the reporting tool or platform, I should say. So the city of Detroit is using Energy Star Portfolio Manager. There's also a transparency element, which I'll talk about later in the presentation. But transparency means reporting benchmarking information to the city, which is then shared with the community. So I will talk a little bit. I see a question.
Yeah, so I notice it's all commercial benchmarking policy. So is the city itself
Yes.
doing similar things too?
Yeah, for their own municipal.
For the own
facilities.
buildings, schools and municipal buildings and stuff?
Yep.
Okay.
Although the city and the school district are separate, but yes, it includes all the public buildings.
All the
as well.
public buildings are part of the 2030 program?
All of the city and all of the school district, yes.
Okay,
They
great.
are part of our program, but they are also, they're required to comply with the ordinance.
Great.
So as I mentioned, it was adopted November 2023. And it does include energy and water data. So here it includes public buildings that are 10,000 square feet. So they actually require even their smaller buildings to comply. And then it's all privately owned commercial, multifamily and industrial buildings over 25,000. There was a phased in approach to this, which I think I'll talk about later on. But again, commercial, multifamily and public market sectors. This is an older slide from the City of Detroit Greenhouse Gas Inventory in 2012, but I think it still generally gives you an idea of the Detroit building composition and in terms of where to focus efforts with carbon emission reductions by through energy efficiency with buildings and kind of focusing on that larger sector or sectors. This is the initial reporting schedule. So it was a phased in approach. So last October, the larger buildings were impacted first. So buildings that are 100,000 square feet or greater were required to comply by October 1st. What that meant is that they were submitting their calendar year data from 2023 to the City of Detroit. Their next round of data is due this June 1st. For the smaller buildings, 25,000 square feet or greater, those buildings are required to comply for the first time this coming June 1st. And they are going to be submitting their 2024 calendar year data. And then again, every June 1st, all of the buildings will be required to submit their prior year's data. There is a transparency date here on the right-hand side. And again, I'll talk a little bit more about that, but that is when the city is planning to make some of this information public. And typically cities do that by posting an interactive map, which again, I'll talk about here briefly. So the City of Detroit has an excellent sustainability team and an excellent benchmarking website and tons of tools and resources. So they've done recorded tutorials. They have, I think it's on my next slide here. Yeah, so you can request one-on-one help. So you can book 30 minutes with their team. You can get that free technical one-on-one assistance from us. through our partnership with the city of Detroit, with our support from Eagle. And then, the last option is that we, at the Detroit 2030 district, if a building in Detroit needs help with complying, we do have an optional minimal like paid membership, which is $350 for a building that's a nonprofit or, well, sorry, I take that back. We're waiving that now because of our support from Eagle. So it's $500 per building for other buildings that just need support with complying. But any building can join us for free and have access to our tools. But if they need additional support, we can provide that. I have a few slides here on the importance of efficiency in buildings. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on these because I think this audience probably understands this fairly well, and this is a little bit text heavy here too.
Do you want to take a couple questions? Because there are a
Sure.
couple in here maybe.
Yeah,
before we go.
why don't we pause and then I can get into that.
All right. Can you actually read them? Oh, I should read them in case people are not watching it. So Mary Jo asked, what are a few common ways that owners or lessees of buildings are reducing their energy use?
So I guess I will answer that question, but I did want to mention this because I think sometimes with this ordinance, there's some confusion that it is requiring buildings to reduce their energy, but it's simply that buildings just need to be consistently tracking. And typically when a building is managing, measuring their building and tracking, then they can manage their building better and they have more data information at hand to make decisions about what improvements. So I don't know what the most common improvements are. We see such a variety.
There are things like LED efficient lighting.
Yeah.
It's usually a big one.
And I mean, some buildings like are so far beyond LEDs that because LEDs have been around for so long, but that's why in Detroit we have, there's so many buildings that are still in need of desperate repair and some of the buildings that are a little bit more have been more recently renovated. There's building automation systems that are being put in. There's also the urban, now I'm forgetting the name of the Urban Tech Exchange. I think that is a partner, or it's something that Bedrock is looking at, how to test out newer technologies, how to pilot different technologies within their buildings. So there's such a variety out there right now, but then there's the buildings that simply just need a new roof.
Well, you got the multi-tenant buildings too, that's some old buildings in Detroit that might not even be insulated, windows could be single pane, really inefficient windows.
Yeah, so I don't have a good sense. I will say something that I'm sure a lot of people are interested in this, that we're seeing from the Pittsburgh 2030 district is I don't know if it's just this past year or if it's been a couple of years in the making, where their team is actually tracking what the improvements are. So they kind of have a sense of like what are the bulk of the improvements that are happening.
Besides benchmarking, they're tracking the changes so they can see what are causing the change. That makes sense. And
that map that I showed earlier of all the policies across the US, benchmarking is the most foundational policy, but it doesn't require a building to do anything. There's a lot of building performance standard policies out there that actually are requiring buildings to make improvements. We don't have any of those in Michigan.
Well, under the renovation or the building codes, there are.
Yeah, the energy codes, and we are adopting an update to our energy code. But there's no like additional
not a building that's not being changed.
Yeah, exactly.
So Thomas asked, in our battle of the buildings, why haven't building and safety departments mandated to build LED certification buildings to lessen carbon emissions related energy use? I should let you read, Nick.
That is a good question, and I don't have a good answer to it. But it would be nice even to have some sort of standardization, almost across the different municipalities instead of each municipality doing its own different, but yeah, I don't have a good answer to that. I think I agree with that statement, question statement, comment that we should be finding ways to work closer with our, if it's the building and safety departments or whoever, planning commission at the local government level.
Yeah. And then he also added, does the increased burning of coal to power electric vehicles offset carbon emissions related to international combustion engine emissions?
I don't have a good answer to that either.
According to, Earth Justice, yes.
According to Earth's Justice, the answer to that question is yes. Okay, cool. All right, does anyone in the room have any questions with what we've gone over so far? No?
How am I doing on time? Okay, we still have, well, and yeah, we're stopping for questions.
7:35.
Perfect. Yeah, no, I think that is helpful. I am gonna go through some of these, like I said, these importance of efficiency in buildings. But the biggest one is that, in terms of reducing carbon emissions, we know that energy efficiency can get us halfway there, close to halfway there. So when we talk about clean energy, we also need to be looking at ways to reduce our consumption of our buildings. And so that efficiency piece is really important. And these are just some economic benefits of energy efficiency, which these are a little outdated because this information was from some previous slides that we had put together, but the idea is still the same, that when we spend money on energy efficiency, it's more economic than spending our money on buying energy. And so when we spend dollars on energy consumption, it's more likely to leave the community, but when we invest in efficiency, it's more likely to remain in it. And then energy efficiency properties are typically better investments, and I think a lot of buildings already know that. But I'll go into benefits of the benchmarking policy too. So like I said, it is really foundational for any future energy policy in Detroit. When we have more efficient buildings, we know that the owners and tenants can save more money, the businesses can reduce their operating costs, greenhouse gas emissions are reduced, and then the pollution that threatens our air and climate is also reduced. So by having a policy, we can really gain these benefits at scale across the entire city. And this is a little outdated also, but it's from American Cities Climate Challenge. And as I mentioned, like when you have a building that's simply just tracking its energy and water usage, typically cities, even just with that, just tracking, people are paying more attention. They're seeing that there's a 3 to 8% reduction in energy across all the participating buildings, which also then equates to saving millions of dollars in energy costs. So these are just some examples of the reduction. I think the city of Chicago adopted their benchmarking ordinance in 2013. So we were 10 years, a decade behind them and other cities that have these policies. This is interesting too. This is again another slightly outdated slide, but when we visited the city of Minneapolis a couple of years ago, they have a benchmarking policy as well. And the interesting thing was they have these areas that they called green zones, which they define as communities that face cumulative exposure to pollution, high poverty, and other social and political issues. So they also, those buildings in those areas are also required to comply with the ordinance, but But they automatically receive priority support and increased funding in the city's green cost sharing program. So it is interesting to think that through this policy, we can actually direct more technical assistance and the potential for directing resources to priority, what the city might feel is a priority building. So we don't have anything like this in Detroit, but this is just a good example of what you could do with this information. Another reason why a policy is important is because the market does need motivation. There are lots of barriers to energy efficiency. Some of that is just simply having access to whole building utility data. We work a lot with the utilities and trying to make the data as accessible as possible and make this as simple as possible for everybody. There's also a lack of market awareness around building performance, and then financing methods. But the policy really is what is necessary in order to get action from the entire population, building population. And I did talk about the transparency piece earlier. So benchmarking ordinances typically have a transparency element to them. This is just a slide that is just one way to think about it. Not everybody agrees with this slide, but similar to knowing the miles per gallon ratings on your car or having nutrition labels on packaged foods, the information is filling a gap in the market. And so it's improving consumer choice and rewarding energy efficiency in buildings. So what does transparency look like? These are just a few examples from other cities. There's usually some sort of visualization, a scorecard, which I shared earlier that this year we as the 2030 district are going to start sharing a simple high-level scorecard with our buildings. But in other cities, it's the cities that are providing these scorecards as part of their benchmarking program, which also there's usually a program built around these policies to help building owners be successful in complying rather than penalizing them. So these are just some ways that the data can be shared. This is some of the data or some that a city may or may not choose to share. So they may share what the property's name is, address, size of the building, what the square footage is, an Energy Star score, just like Energy Star scores on your appliances. Energy Star portfolio manager generates a score of your building and how you're doing compared to other buildings of a similar type in your area. It also shares your energy use and greenhouse gas emissions, but these are just some of the metrics that a city may or may not choose to share. So this is also slightly outdated. I'm not sure if Chicago's still doing it exactly this way, but all these little dots represent buildings in Chicago that are required to comply with the ordinance. And when you hover over one of those dots, it shows you the address of the building, what type of property is it? It's an office building. How large is it? How many square feet? Has the neighborhood, year built, how many buildings does it include? It gives you that Energy Star score that I mentioned. And just for your information, it does require, if you want to be an Energy Star certified building, and I'm sure you guys have seen the plaques on buildings that are Energy Star certified, you have to have a score of 75 or greater. So this one, in this example, has a score of 91. And then it gives you energy use intensity and greenhouse gas emissions. So they're providing more data than other cities may. But if you search Washington, D.C., they're showing the actual annual energy consumption data as part of the metrics that they're sharing. And all of this is made public. The city of Detroit, at least the last time I looked at their FAQ document, they're only planning on I believe they're planning on having an interactive map that shows all the buildings and only sharing which buildings are in compliance, not in compliance, and are exempt. I think that they're just, I think there's always, there's a lot of hesitancy, or a lot of, not hesitancy, I think there's,
Caution.
yeah, I think a lot of the buildings are a little, may not want this information posted, at least initially. So I think that they're only planning on sharing limited information about the buildings. And then how do you comply? So you have to collect your data, you have to input your data, and then you have to report it to the city. So I'll just go through those steps in a little bit more detail. Like I said, the EPA has a tool called Energy Star Portfolio Manager. This is the industry standard for benchmarking commercial buildings. And it is the most used energy management and tracking tool for commercial buildings. So it does enable you to benchmark the energy use of any type of building. A couple of years ago, they also started, they added single family homes. So I use it to track my own home's energy consumption and water consumption and generate my home's Energy Star score as well. So
Can anyone do that?
you can just create a free account. Yep, and then you can create your property profile. So you can create your own home or building. And then you can share that building with other people. So if you wanted to share with Jeff, Jeff would just need to create his own account, and then you could share, and you could give him full access to your home, or you could just give him read only. But there, you know, so the information can be shared, which you think about some of these buildings, they have, oftentimes it's somebody who's handling paying the bills, and the facilities folks don't even get the information. But you know, there's a way to share this information with more people.
Or the
on your
building
team.
owner, if
Or
it's
the
paid by
building.
the tenants, the building owner may not have access to it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I am gonna talk about, hopefully I have a slide in here about another tool that we have. But yeah, so your first step is you have to just collect your property information. So what's the building type? You know, the address, year built, what's the square footage? There's other optional things you can track, like operating hours, number of computers, number of workers. We're not so focused on capturing that data right now. We're really focused on getting the property profile created and getting the building set up and tracking consistently. So we do work with the utilities to automate the data. And so we do, I'll mention a little bit about that. But I think if the building wanted to go after Energy Star certification, then there's some additional detailed information you need to be included. And then your actual energy and water usage data, and I always recommend that you include your cost. It's optional, but include your cost. You can manually enter it. So for my home, I get my bill and I type it in manually. There's also a spreadsheet upload, so you can track it in a spreadsheet and then do a bulk upload of the data, or you can do automated data uploads. So DTE, in 2021, we partnered with DTE to do a DTE data hub pilot. So that pilot is, or I should say that tool is available to any building member that's part of a Michigan 2030 district where DTE service is provided. So Grand Rapids, I think, has DTE electric service, and Consumers Gas. In Detroit, we're all DTE, and then we have some Constellation gas customers. Ann Arbor and Washtenaw County have DTE as well. I think they also have Consumers and Constellation. Lansing does not have DTE service, so they don't utilize the tool. But if you are a building member of any of the Michigan 2030 districts, you can access this tool. So it's a little confusing to get through the process, which is why we often are providing more one-on-one assistance with getting it set up. But if a building does not want our assistance and wants access to this tool, they can join our program and they can it provides whole building aggregate data. So if you think of these larger buildings downtown where there's multiple tenants or multifamily buildings where you would have to go around and collect bills from each tenant in order to get their information and probably sign off on some privacy statement or something. So the DTE data, they do provide the whole building aggregate data. So now we've actually, of all the building types that have been coming to us for help, we've had primarily affordable multifamily properties. So I'm really excited to be working with that building type because it does impact a lot of the residents that are living in those buildings too. Well, it doesn't impact them. It could potentially, the data could potentially inform either the city or the owner or, you know, and resources could be directed for some of the lower performing buildings.
What time range does like DTE provide for that benchmarking?
I don't know if they have a.
Does it go back a couple of years?
Oh, time frame, yes.
Yeah.
It's 2 years of historic data.
Okay.
Oftentimes, so they'll put 2 years of data in and then it updates on a monthly basis. Oftentimes, there's additional data prior to those 2 years, but unfortunately, the way it's set up, you have to go in and download it in a spreadsheet.
Okay.
Make a few changes and then upload it. So, but at a minimum, you're getting the 2 years data and then monthly data going forward.
Okay, cool.
So yeah, then you share your property with the city of Detroit and you do it all through that EPA tool. So yeah, I think I covered everything. I'm sure there's more questions.
There are more questions. Does anyone have a question in the room though, before we go to the chat? You have a question?
No, I don't.
Okay. Anyone? No? All right. I did see that, let's see, gotta get back to where we were last talking. So David, Richards did copy a link, it was an article about EVs and coal burning and stuff that he shared in there. So people might want to get that link if they're interested in learning more about that. So Thomas asked, when these policies are adopted, will funding be awarded to energy auditors, energy managers, insulation, weatherization contractors? What is incentive for building owners to comply?
Yeah, when these policies are adopted.
Like he's asking, is there funding available to bring experts in to help them figure out how to save? Like how to better weatherize or, you know, things like that.
Right now, there are not any programs tied to this policy that would be funding these. I'm just trying to figure out how to best answer this question, or if I know how. Because I don't know what the future of the policy.
Yeah, you
is
can
like
talk to what,
either.
how currently,
Yeah.
right, what's available currently.
Yeah, I mean, right now it's, yeah, with just the benchmarking ordinance, I guess, okay, City of Ann Arbor is a good example because and I don't even know all of their programs because the city of Ann Arbor has a climate millage that they voted on, and it's providing $6 million per year just for climate work in the city of Ann Arbor for 20 years. So $6 million a year for 20 years. So with that funding, their Office of Sustainability has been able to develop various programs and like funding opportunities, like I think what Thomas is asking about. So we all know that there's federal tax incentives that you can get when you make improvements to your home or building. There's also DTE rebates that you can get. And then there is a state rebate program that that's available to certain residents in the state. But the city of Ann Arbor has their own incentive program to
Hmm.
kind of further drive people to take action, to either get an audit or actually implement something.
In addition to what DTE and the state.
In addition, so
offers.
they have their own incentives, so. We don't have anything like that in Detroit currently outside of, different grant opportunities that then a program or a pilot might be offered, to help, but yeah, that climate millage really is, driving some of, I think, what Thomas is asking about.
Well, and then what you said earlier too, is just by benchmarking the information and making it publicly available, so. Potential tenants that might be interested, because if they have to
Yeah.
pay the utilities and it's not
Yeah.
energy efficient, they're gonna end up having to pay higher bills.
Exactly, yeah, so like that transparency piece too, even in Detroit, you know, the building owners and managers want to be doing the sustainable thing, and they want to be supporting these efforts in Detroit, and they don't want to be viewed as not participating
Yeah.
and not complying, and so that is also driving things as well. But we're so new into this ordinance, it just took
And-
effect October 1st, and it was extended to December 31st for the larger buildings, so things are starting to pick up more, but the city is just primarily just trying to continue to build awareness, get
Right.
postcards sent out, make sure buildings even know that they have to comply, and then know what kind of support is available to them.
So it's kind of at the beginning of this process in Detroit.
Yeah,
So the first thing is setting up the data so it can be measured and tracked.
yeah.
Okay, so Mary Jo said, what motivated the city of Detroit and other cities to undertake this? Is it mostly to improve air quality?
Mhm. So this, and Mary Jo, I think in the beginning of my presentation, I mentioned the Detroit City Council Green Task Force, which is made up of, various volunteers. And so this was an effort that was led by a group outside of the city that really felt strongly that the city needed an ordinance like this. And during that same period of time when the ordinance was being worked on, the city was also developing its climate strategy.
Mhm.
And within that climate strategy, the city established that a benchmarking ordinance would be necessary in order for them to help. Otherwise, how do we
How do you know?
manage?
Yeah.
How do we manage and know where we stand in terms of reducing carbon emissions if we don't understand how our buildings are performing? So it really feeds, there's several goals of the climate strategy. So the benchmarking ordinance was one of those goals. So I think it took years. It took over 5 years of time volunteer time, to get this ordinance, to get people to understand the importance of it and build up that support. And then finally, city council did vote unanimously to support it. So it ties directly into, a lot of these policies tie directly into these climate plans that local governments have adopted.
So it's not just air quality, but the support.
No, and that, I mean,
Climate
there's so
change
many
initiatives.
there's so many benefits associated with it, but it is like a direct goal of the climate plans that are in place.
Holly's asking, would my community of Brighton with a population of approximately 8,000 people be eligible to become a 2030 district? If so, what are the first steps a Brighton would take?
That's exciting. That's a good question too. So I mentioned that Lansing is an emerging district right now. So I wasn't there from the beginning. Peggy Matta was one of the first. She was a local architect who felt that we should pursue a Detroit 2030 district, and started that process in 2013, and it took years in finding the funding and kind of building it up. But there is a process that you can follow, from the 2030 districts network.
So like if Holly wanted to go to the city of Brighton and say we should do this, who would Holly and those people turn to figure out that process of how to become a
Yeah,
2030 district?
Well, Peggy, when she approached the city about this initially, she went to the planning commission, but it
Mhm.
just depends on who,
But I meant on the 2030 side, where would they go?
if they wanted to start.
Correct.
She should reach out to me and I can connect her.
With the right
Because
people.
we have a 2030 districts network.
Okay,
So, yeah, I think it would be having a conversation. And then also like, the city of Royal Oak doesn't have a 2030 district, but they are launching their Royal Oak Energy Challenge as a way to kind of start to work with building owners in the
work
city.
towards it.
So it doesn't have to look exactly like a 2030 district. It could be a little bit different in each community.
Mhm.
And then there's also the county approach, which, the 2030 districts in Michigan have always started as a city. Could there be a county?
Well, and Brighton's in
Initiative.
Livingston, right?
Yeah, so if there were a number of communities within the county that wanted something like this, I don't know, I'm just thinking of different possibilities.
And when you said 2030 is, I forget how you just described it. You said it's like a network.
Mhm.
Is there any kind of umbrella organization or is it just a bunch
It
of,
is the
Oh.
2030 districts network.
that's the
So
name of the
we are
official?
part of it. All
Okay.
of the districts across the US are part of that 2030 districts network.
And they have staff in that network that help administer and oversee?
It's a small staff.
Small staff, okay.
We're all
But-
fairly small.
So anyone interested could
Small but
contact
mighty.
you and you'd put them in touch with the right people?
Yeah,
Okay.
definitely. Yeah.
Cool. All right, so David is asking it starts with a statement. If I understand it correctly, the purpose of District 2030 is to permit property owners, especially large property owners, to evaluate their energy usage and environmental quality, compare it to others, and make information available to property owners how they may improve their utility usage and environmental quality. Is that correct?
That's a really good, yes, a really good description right there. So we do a lot of, I know we're over time too, but we do a lot of education and awareness building around this too. But we also try to bring tools, like I mentioned, like the partnership with DTE and the DTE data hub to our building owners to make it more easy to track, because it is. And you're working with multiple utilities that all have a
Especially
different
if you're a
process.
big property with a lot of tenants.
Or a
it would be really
portfolio of
hard.
properties, yeah,
Yeah.
like thinking about all the city buildings, all the school district buildings, all the bedrock buildings. It's
Yeah,
So we try to help make this as painless as possible and get teams information that they can then use within their own company or organization.
cool.
Yeah.
And Paul did share a link to the 2030 become a member.
Thank you.
URL, so
Thank
people
you.
can check that out as well as.
Yeah, and Holly or anyone, feel
Contact
free to
you.
reach out to me if you have any questions. I guess on an ending note, I will mention, there is, nothing has been solidified here at all, but there is growing interest in communities outside of Detroit. And so, there might be in the future.
Oh, in like Wayne County?
Exactly, so there might be something in the future where, similar to what happened in Ann Arbor, that I think it was about a year ago, maybe a little bit more, that Ann Arbor expanded to the county level. So they kind of grew out of Ann Arbor and are working with all the surrounding communities in that area. So, given the interest level, there likely will be some sort of expansion, just don't know what that looks like or when, or. it
Could
seems
even be
there's
like
so much-
SEMCOG or something too, where it's even a little bigger.
Yeah, because I also have talked to people who are in Oakland or Macomb,
Yeah,
but we don't work in those spaces. Not because we don't want to, it's just not where.
Right.
We're kind of just focused on Detroit right now. But there's a lot of interest. Yeah.
Cool, awesome. Well, thank you, Kendall. Any other questions? Yeah, go
Are
ahead.
there any tax implications by improving or not improving? Are there any incentives?
Not right now. No, nothing.
There's the incentives like you talked about earlier that are available from like DTE and the
Yeah.
government for like putting in improving efficiencies in
Yeah,
the properties.
there's
Well, in some
federal,
cities, if you put solar on your house, it improves you have to pay higher taxes because it's a big improvement in your property.
To the home, yeah.
I haven't heard any of that in Detroit yet.
Good.
I think that was an issue a while ago in Ann Arbor, like years ago. But I think they figured out a way
good.
to work with.
People on that.
Yeah, because now they have significant, through that climate millage work, they have a lot of solar going.
Yeah, you drive around Washington and there's tons of solar.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, different incentives but yeah, right now we just, the federal tax incentives and the utility tax incentives that are,
Wonder how long that'll last.
well, yeah. Yes,
yeah, there's a lot of mixed emotions about that because they've shown that a lot of that actually is in a lot of Republican areas. It's getting a lot of benefit from IRA and it has
Yeah.
to do with those things. So it'll be interesting to see what happens.
I think a lot of people are gonna feel what's happening now.
I think a lot of people already do. Any other questions? No? Any other questions from the people online or looks like everyone's still on there, so they found it very interesting.
I guess I can put I'll put my email in the chat, even though it's on the screen.
Yeah,
Easier to,
I don't know if the chat window shows up in the recording or not. All right, great. Well, thanks everyone for coming.
thank you.
Yeah, we have,
Thanks, everyone.
thank you. For getting thank yous in the note. And we're actually having an author that's gonna be doing a presentation in April. And one of the things that she's gonna be talking about, so she has a really interesting book that I recently read. That's talking a lot of, I don't want to talk too much about the book, but it's a family from like Chicago, Ann Arbor that owned actually north of the Sioux in Canada that owned some property up there and so some of the history of their relationship with the land and stuff. But she also talks, especially like at the end of the book, she talks about the importance of like how to communicate with issues and she has a background with working with environmental communications. So what I'm asking her to talk about, I don't know if Sally's on, but I'm asking her to talk a little bit about how to communicate about some of these big issues and stuff. And as well as talk about her book. So we'll be sharing that soon and then we'll be sharing, right now there's 2 hikes already, as I talked at the beginning of the meeting, that are planned for March on the 22nd and I think it's the 30th or the 31st. And then we already have a couple hikes planned in April. And one of them is actually in Washtenaw County, and I have a friend that's a farmland preservation activist in Washtenaw County, and he's gonna take us to one of the properties that he helped conserve, and he's gonna talk a little bit about some of the farmland preservation efforts and stuff they've been doing in Washtenaw and other places. So,
Great.
thanks, everyone.
Thank you.